that I am strongly opposed to this disastrous, unfair, and destructive piece of legislation that we are debating today that will give massive tax breaks to the wealthiest people in our country, to the most profitable corporations, and to billionaire campaign contributors. What really concerns me is that we are debating, as everybody acknowledges, a very complicated and confusing piece of legislation that is over 500 pages long. And here we are a few hours before we're going to be voting on this legislation. Frankly, nobody has seen it. Nobody even knows what is in this legislation. It's probably being written as we speak right now. Not a very effective or intelligent way to deal with legislation that impacts every American and trillions of dollars. One of the concerns that I have as we look at this bill is there are provisions in it that nobody really understands in terms of who it impacts and whom it benefits. Buried in this legislation, just as one example, buried in this legislation on page 503, section 14504, is a paragraph entitled, quote, "Modification to source rules involving possessions," end of quote. That's the title of that section. Now, what does that mean? It means that, as best we can understand, if you are a hedge fund manager who is a resident of the Virgin Islands, you will be able to get a major tax break on capital gains and a 90% reduction in tax liability on your income. Now, Mr. President, it has been estimated that corporations and the wealthy are avoiding over $100 billion each and every year by stashing their cash in the Caribbean and other offshore tax havens. It appears that this provision will make a bad situation even worse. Adding insult to injury, Mr. President, it appears that this provision may only help a handful of wealthy hedge fund managers who have claimed residency in the Virgin Islands. It has been estimated that this provision alone, one provision in a 500-plus page bill, will cost over $600 million in lost revenue in the next decade. $600 million in lost revenue when we have a $20 trillion debt and 40 million people living in poverty. Now, I see no Republican senators on the floor, but I'm sure that staff is watching this discussion. So I have a question that I would like to discuss with Senator Wyden, but more importantly with some of our Republican colleagues. And what I would like to ask my Republican colleagues is whether or not there has been a hearing on the need to provide tax breaks to wealthy hedge fund managers who have established residency in the Caribbean. I would say to my friend from Oregon, there are a lot of problems facing our country: a declining middle class, 40 million people living in poverty, 28 million people having no health insurance. I am not aware that one of the great crises facing this country is the need to provide tax breaks to wealthy hedge fund managers who have established residency in the Caribbean. It may be one of those great national crises that I have missed, but I don't quite perceive it as being an issue that the American people seem to be deeply concerned about. And I would hope, Mr. President, that my Republican colleagues, maybe Senator Hatch or others, will come down to the floor and tell us who this provision benefits. Are we talking about one hedge fund manager? Are we talking about two? Are we talking about three hedge fund managers who are going to divvy up some $600 million in tax breaks over the next decade? And I would yield or ask my colleague from Oregon, who is the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, his thoughts on the issue.
I'm very pleased